In the winter of 1979, the quiet lakefront town of Windermere, Wisconsin was unsettled by the disappearance of a boy. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a pair of skates frozen into the surface of Windermere Lake. But 6 years later, when a fisherman snagged a rusted toolbox from the thawed lake bed, he uncovered a truth so cold it would unravel the very fabric of the town's memory and lead to the most horrifying revelation imaginable. It was January 3rd, the coldest night of the season. The lake had frozen clean through, smooth as glass, silent as death. Danny Cray, 15, had laced up his skates after dinner. He told his sister he needed to clear his head. No one questioned it. Danny often skated alone. He moved like a shadow across the ice, long limbs cutting graceful arcs through the dusk. No music this time. Just the wind, the scrape of steel on frozen water, and the faint glow of the town behind him. A boy trying to escape the noise of life. By morning, he was gone. A search began at first light. Dogs, helicopters, neighbors with flashlights and flares. His mother wept silently as police combed the woods. His father refused to speak. Then someone spotted the skates. They jutted out of the lake like broken gravestones, perfectly vertical laces stiff with frost, no body in sight. Divers chipped through the ice, but visibility was poor. No sign of him. The skates were removed, bagged, studied. Theories began to grow. Some whispered about thin ice and a boy who fell through. Others mentioned things darker: jealousy, violence, secrets. But without a body, there was no evidence, no proof. Only a pair of blades pointed skyward and a town that slowly sealed over the wound. Until 1985, when the lake finally gave something back. The toolbox rose like a coffin from the deep. It was snagged on a fishing hook meant for perch. Heavy, rusted, locked tight. The man who hauled it up nearly dropped it when he saw the smear on the lid, faded red, streaked by water, but unmistakably blood. Inside, a cracked skating helmet. A slim leather wallet. A hammer pitted and stained. The helmet bore a deep dent caved in at the back. The wallet held damp bills, a school ID, and something no one could explain. A torn movie ticket, dated the night Danny vanished. Time-stamped 9:12 p.m. Danny was last seen alive at 8. Danny Cray had always preferred the quiet. Not the absence of sound, but something deeper, an isolation, a deliberate tuning out of the world. He would walk the shoreline with headphones draped around his neck, not playing music, just resting there. He hated crowds, avoided parties, and he skated alone. His room was orderly. Rows of cassette tapes arranged by artist, then year. His journals stacked neatly in a locked box beneath the bed. They found sketches in the margins, faces with no eyes, black water-broken helmets. His mother said they were nothing, just a boy with an imagination. But Danny's silence had weight. People felt it when he entered a room. He was polite but distant. Teachers called him focused. Classmates less kindly called him off. He was good at only one thing: skating. The Windermere Blades weren't a famous team, but for a small town they meant everything. The local rink was half-rotted. The lights flickered, but when Danny stepped onto the ice, he transformed. He skated like he had something chasing him. Fast, fluid, with terrifying precision. At 15, he was on track for regionals. He should have been proud, but instead he grew quieter, sharper, as if the spotlight hurt. The last week before his disappearance, neighbors recalled a shift. Danny stopped showing up to practice. His coach, Mr. Anders, assumed he was sick. His mother said he barely spoke at dinner. His sister Marla said he stayed up late scribbling in his notebooks. The only time he smiled was when he came back from the lake, his cheeks red from the cold skates slung over his shoulder. There was a fight, though. A day before he vanished, Danny had shouted at someone across the lake. Marla heard it from the window. She couldn't see who it was, only a dark figure retreating through the trees. Danny stormed back inside, slammed the door, and locked himself in the bathroom. He emerged half an hour later with blood on his knuckle. When asked about it later, Marla couldn't recall what he'd said. Just one sentence muttered under his breath before he disappeared into his room. "They don't want me to be quiet." The next night he left after dinner, said he needed to clear his head. He didn't come back. Kyle Mercer was the kind of boy people noticed. Broad shoulders, quick temper, a loud laugh that cut across locker rooms. He'd been the star of the Windmere Blades until Danny Craig glided onto the ice and rewrote the hierarchy. Kyle was a bruiser, powerful, aggressive, and impatient. Danny was the opposite, quiet, methodical, impossible to catch. Coaches began favoring Danny. The attention shifted. So did Kyle's smile. Teammates remembered the tension. At first it was small, a shove on the ice, whispered insults in the locker room. But in the weeks leading up to Danny's disappearance, it escalated. Kyle had been overheard in the school parking lot yelling at Danny loud enough to draw a crowd. "You think you're better than us, better than me." Danny said nothing, just stared at him like he was waiting for Kyle to finish. That silence enraged him. After Danny vanished, Kyle was questioned immediately. He didn't seem shocked. Said he hadn't seen Danny that night. Claimed he was home watching a movie with his dad. The alibi checked out. Barely. His father, a man with an old beer gut and a tired voice, confirmed it but couldn't recall the film. Couldn't even be sure what day it was. Kyle remained in town. Got into minor trouble underage drinking, a busted mailbox, a few fights. Nothing serious. Nothing that stuck. Still, he never spoke about Danny. Not once. Years later, when the toolbox surfaced, police revisited the old suspects. Kyle was now working at a mechanic shop. Still lean, still quick with a temper. When asked about Danny, he paused only once when shown the helmet. "That's not how he died," he muttered. The detective pressed him, but Kyle clammed up, said he had nothing more to say. The helmet had a crushed indentation, blunt force. The autopsy would later confirm a single devastating blow to the back of the head. Kyle had motive envy. He had a history aggression. And now he had something worse, knowledge he shouldn't have. Unless he'd seen the body, unless he'd been there. But the story wasn't finished unraveling, because Kyle wasn't the only one Danny had argued with that week. Just 2 houses down, behind drawn blinds and war memorabilia, lived a man with a secret of his own. The Trent house sat in shadow. Its windows were always closed. The lawn went unmowed. Curtains never parted. Children crossed the street to avoid the yard. Adults, too. Everyone in Windmere knew something about Mr. Trent, they just didn't agree on what. Some said he was a former Marine. Others swore he was dishonorably discharged. What was fact? James Trent was a Vietnam veteran, reclusive, bitter, prone to anger. He lived alone after his wife left in '73. Said nothing to neighbors unless it was to complain. And complain he did about barking dogs, car engines, and especially noise from the lake. Danny Craig played his music loud. Instrumental tracks on a worn cassette deck he brought to the ice. It echoed across the water late at night. Mr. Trent hated it. He'd called the Crays 3 times in December. Once he marched to the edge of their property and shouted across the lake. The week before Danny disappeared, the two had a confrontation. Witnessed by Mrs. Lorne, a neighbor who happened to be watering her plants despite the frost. She saw Trent grab Danny's arm, shake him. Danny pulled away, expression unreadable, and skated off without a word. When asked about it, Trent claimed Danny was polluting the peace and needed to learn respect. He said the boy had looked at him wrong. Then he added a strange phrase, barely audible on the interview tape. He was trying to disappear. That comment lingered. Trent said he'd been asleep the night Danny vanished. Alone. He'd taken sleeping pills, he claimed. No one could confirm it. Police searched his house weeks later, found nothing. No blood, no helmet, no hammer. But in his garage hung a pegboard of tools. One hammer was missing. When asked, he shrugged. Must have misplaced it. The lake was frozen then. No warrant, no arrest. Years passed. The lake thawed. Time eroded urgency. Trent stayed the same, bitter, watchful. He kept his porch light off, sat in his recliner facing the road. Never opened the door on Halloween. When the toolbox surfaced in '85, detectives returned. They showed him the hammer, the dented helmet, the rusted blood. He stared at it, all expression flat. That could be anyone's, he said. But there was a flicker, just a moment, when his hand trembled. Still no prints, no match. Just a shadow where something once lived. And someone else had begun acting strangely. Marla Cray was 17 when her brother vanished. She was on the couch that night, half asleep, when Danny walked out the front door with his skates slung over one shoulder and his coat unzipped. She remembered the sound of the door clicking shut. She remembered the cold draft that lingered after he left. And she remembered perhaps most clearly the silence that followed. She never heard his footsteps again. In the days that followed, Marla became hollow. She helped with flyers, took calls from neighbors, accompanied her mother to the station. But something in her was gone, like the lake had claimed not just her brother, but the part of her that had once believed in safety. Her boyfriend, Jake Lawson, held her through that first week. He brought soup, sat on the porch with her father, helped organize the school vigil. People said he was strong, reliable, a good kid, but in the months after cracks began to form, Jake became distant, irritable. He snapped at Marla over small things, grew cold when Danny's name was mentioned. Once, when she asked him what he remembered from that night, his answer came too quickly. "I didn't see him. I was at the gas station." It was a simple answer, but too simple. When pressed by police at the time, Jake claimed he'd been driving home from a friend's house. Stopped to grab smokes at the Sinclair station on Ridgeway. Clerk didn't remember seeing him. Cameras didn't exist yet. Another dead end. But there was something else. Something Marla hadn't told anyone. She'd seen Jake that night. From her bedroom window sometime after midnight, she'd looked out toward the lake. She couldn't sleep. She thought she saw a figure near the waterline. Tall, coat flapping, walking with purpose. At the time, she'd convinced herself it was a trick of the shadows. But now, 6 years later, with the helmet recovered and the hammer laid bare on a detective's table, the memory had sharpened. It was Jake. She was sure of it. He never talked about Danny, never asked questions. When the box was found, Jake said only one thing. They should have left it buried. That night, Marla found a folded note under the old bookshelf. It had fallen loose from one of Danny's journals. 4 words written in jagged ink, "He saw me skate." It surfaced on a still morning just after the thaw. Dennis Horvath was fishing for perch near the southern cove of Windmere Lake, a place where the ice lingered longer, where the water pooled deeper. He'd cast his line lazily, already half regretting the early start when the hook snagged. It didn't feel like a fish. It dragged slow, heavy, resisting not with motion, but mass. He hauled it in with both hands. What broke the surface wasn't alive, but it looked like it had once been. A battered, rust-smeared toolbox, the kind mechanics used decades ago, bolted shut by time and pressure. Its metal warped, its edges curled, and on the lid, a reddish smear. Browned by age, but unmistakably organic. Dennis stared for a long time before calling the sheriff. It took hours to pry it open at the station. The lock was rust-welded. When they cracked it, the hinges groaned like something exhaling after years underwater. Inside were 3 things. A helmet, black fiberglass with a long fissure spidered across the crown. The padding inside had rotted away, leaving the impression of a head long gone. A wallet, leather cracked, still bearing the initials DC in fading silver ink. Inside were a few damp dollar bills, a school ID, and a half-torn movie ticket. And the hammer. Its handle warped, the head pitted with corrosion. But along the blunt side, just beneath the rust, was a darker stain, dried thick and flaked. Forensics would later confirm what everyone suspected. It was blood. The helmet bore a single concentrated fracture, not from a fall, not from impact against ice, but from a targeted, deliberate blow. Danny Cray hadn't slipped. He had been struck. Once. Hard. The scene was surreal. For 6 years, Danny had existed only in rumor. Now pieces of him were laid out on a steel table beneath fluorescent lights. Cold artifacts of violence. A boy reduced to evidence. The wallet was catalogued, dried, examined. The bills were unreadable, but the ticket remained legible. A stub for midnight run, time-stamped 9:12 p.m., January 3rd, 1979. An hour after Danny was presumed dead. There was no body, no hair, no fingerprints. Just 3 items sealed in steel sunk to the lakebed like a coffin. And one unanswered question that now chilled investigators deeper than any winter wind. Why was the ticket there? The stub was stained but intact. The ink bleached slightly by water but still visible beneath the smears. Midnight Run. Theater 2. Admit 1. 9:12 p.m. Jan 3, 1979. Detective Brunner stared at it under the magnifying glass. It was too specific, too deliberate. The tear line was clean, not something that floated loose or got dropped by accident. Someone had placed it in the wallet, or left it there that night. The working theory had always been simple. Danny skated out after dinner and never came back. Estimated time of death sometime between 800 and 8:15 based on when his skates were found frozen into the lake and when the ice had begun to harden again under the dropping temperature. But this ticket changed everything. The movie had started at 9:00 p.m. Danny had been seen alive at 8:00. If the ticket was legitimate, if it was handed to him not planted, he must have entered the theater an hour after everyone thought he'd died. But no one recalled seeing him there. The Windermere Twin Cinema was small. 2 screens, 4 staff. The theater logs from that night were long gone, but there was one constant, a man still working the box office all these years later, Howard Blake. Soft-spoken, forgettable, the kind of person who never quite left the town he grew up in. He remembered dates like others remembered birthdays, kept journals, train tickets, receipts. His memory was precise, oddly so. When asked, Howard hesitated only once before nodding. Yes, I remember Danny. He came alone. Cold, quiet, didn't say much, just stood by the heater for a bit. Did he buy a ticket? Howard blinked. No, I gave him one. I remember because it was Theater 2 and it was mostly empty. Thought he looked like he needed to sit down. It matched the stub. There was something strange in his tone, detached, almost reverent, as if recalling a painting, not a boy. Detectives pressed him, but Howard gave no further detail. Just a slow, practiced shake of the head. He never came out, though. I watched the doors. Never saw him leave. A simple statement. One easy to overlook. But it held weight. A suggestion of presence and possession. If Danny was alive at 9:12 p.m., then the timeline was broken. Or someone had gone to great lengths to make it look that way. Jake Lawson was always described the same way, dependable, clean-cut, someone you could count on to change a tire or paint a fence. But under that composed exterior, there was a heat simmering just beneath the skin. He'd dated Marla Cray for over a year. Teachers liked him. Parents approved. But classmates told other stories about outbursts at parties, slammed lockers, a fist through a window during a fight over a parking space. He kept it quiet, but the fuse was there. And he had a grudge. Jake hadn't liked Danny. That much was known. He thought the boy was weird, cold, too protective of his sister. Danny, in turn, never trusted him. Marla once confessed that Danny found a lighter in Jake's jacket pocket. Danny hated smoking. The two had argued sharp and low behind closed doors. After Danny disappeared, Jake became the shoulder to cry on. The one who helped carry boxes, fix the gutter, stood silently at the vigil. But Marla noticed things, how he flinched at police cruisers, how his gaze lingered on the lake too long, how he never once said Danny's name aloud. In 1985, when the helmet was recovered, detectives brought Jake back in. He sat rigid in the chair, jaw tight. Said he hadn't been near the lake that night. Then they showed him the movie ticket. A flicker crossed his face. He claimed again he'd been driving home from a friend's house. But he couldn't remember which friend. His story had shifted over the years: gas station, house party, home alone. Then a quiet revelation surfaced. A theater employee recalled Jake had once worked a few shifts at the Windermere Twin Cinema back in late '78, briefly, just before he started dating Marla. His record was clean, but the overlap was undeniable. When asked if he'd ever worked with Howard Blake, Jake paused. Didn't talk to him much. Kinda odd. The way he said it, measured, almost rehearsed, didn't sit right. But the detectives couldn't pin him. No evidence tied him directly to the toolbox. No blood, no prints. Just a silence that thickened with every question. Then Marla brought them the note, the 4 words from Danny's journal. He saw me skate. They asked Jake what it meant. He shrugged. but the twitch in his right hand said otherwise. And still beneath these red herrings and half-truths, the real answer waited, watching, listening, hiding in plain sight. Howard Blake lived above the bakery now, a modest walk-up with yellowed curtains and dust lining every sill. He'd been working at the Windermere Twin Cinema since 1974, longer than most remembered. Still ran the projector booth when needed, still took tickets on slow nights. When detectives returned with more questions, he welcomed them with chamomile tea and a faint smile. "I already told you," he said, voice gentle. "Danny came in late, seemed cold. I gave him a ticket, that's all." The notebook on his table was open. Neat handwriting, a catalog of film reels by date, temperature, and projection angle. He turned a page. "January 3rd, he said, tapping. Mild wind, 14 degrees. Started the reel at 8:58. They asked again if he'd seen Danny leave. "No," Howard replied slowly. "I watched. Theater 2 empties toward the lake. The exit light flickered back, then I liked watching the shadow patterns when people came out. But I never saw his silhouette. He spoke like a man remembering weather, not death. There was something off in his certainty. He recalled the movie Midnight Run and even quoted a line. He recalled how many people attended 12, or maybe 13. But his voice only faltered once when asked how Danny looked that night. He seemed quiet. The word lingered, like he didn't want to be seen. Howard rubbed the back of his neck. "You know," he added, "he always used to come by during the off hours, just to sit near the radiator. Said it helped him think." Detective Brunner frowned. This wasn't common knowledge. Danny's journals never mentioned the theater. No one else had seen him with Howard, yet the man spoke like he'd known the boy well. Too well. On a hunch, Brunner asked to see the projection booth. Howard agreed unbothered. The room was small, packed with reels, tape spools, and tin canisters labeled by hand. In the corner, a stack of worn winter coats. On a hook, something older, a scarf, green and black. The Crays had described it missing since the night Danny disappeared. Howard followed their eyes and smiled. "That's been there years," he said. "Lost and found." But his gaze didn't meet theirs. And beneath the hum of the old projector fan, a subtle truth began to stir. This man had seen more than he claimed. He remembered too much, and perhaps too fondly. The evidence had spread wide. Motives frayed in every direction: jealousy, rage, guilt, fear. But none of the suspects quite fit. Each one left the shape of a wound, but not the weapon. Kyle had the anger, but not the patience. Mr. Trent had the temper, but not the opportunity. Jake had the lies, but no direct tie to the helmet or hammer. Howard had nothing, on paper, but Detective Brunner couldn't let go of the scarf. It had been buried in a stack of projectionist gear, dated coats, faded notebooks, a single pair of skates whose laces had fused together with time. Danny's scarf, unmistakable in its stitching, had rested there for 6 years, and Howard had called it lost and found. There was no record of a lost and found. No logs, no mention in Danny's journals that he ever left anything behind. And yet, when questioned again, Howard added a new detail. He liked the silence up here, the whirring of the reels, said it helped him focus. It was said so softly, Brunner nearly missed it. Focus. That word appeared 5 times in Danny's journal, but never in relation to the theater. How did Howard know Brunner pulled the case files again, looking for anything, some trace of cross-reference? And there it was, a complaint from 1979, from the owner of the Windermere Twin, filed 2 days after Danny vanished. A projector room lock had been broken, no sign of forced entry, nothing stolen, just a loose latch and a damaged heater coil melted slightly as if it had been overloaded. And underneath it, scrawled in margin ink from the property manager, smelled something sharp, like bleach or ammonia. The heater, the timeline, the theater door that exited toward the lake. Brunner drove back to the cinema alone that night, stood beneath the theater's rear exit, and looked out across the frozen expanse. A clear path from the exit to the shoreline, undisturbed in winter, hidden in summer. Howard had said he never saw Danny leave, but he never said Danny couldn't have been carried out. The final breadcrumb wasn't a word, it wasn't even a thing. It was the silence. Howard had spoken about it like worship. He preserved it, protected it, claimed Danny needed it. But perhaps when Danny spoke too loudly, skated too freely, Howard believed he had to quiet him, permanently. Howard didn't run. When Detective Brunner returned with the warrant flanked by officers and the echo of boot steps in the narrow stairwell, Howard simply opened the door. The smile was gone. His face looked tired, but not surprised. Inside his apartment, the air was sterile. Not dusty clean. Too clean. The faint smell of ammonia still lingered, clinging to the wallpaper. A fresh scent layered over rot. They found the hammer's twin in a drawer meticulously labeled Backup. Worn grip. The model matched the one found in the lake. The leather wrapping identical, same fraying on the edge. Then came the journals. Not Danny's, Howard's. Lined notebooks carefully written in blue ink. Dates, observations, sketches of the lake, the theater, the skaters. One name repeated again and again. Danny. Jan 1. He stayed longer today. Doesn't mind the cold. Jan 3. He said something loud. It hurt. I had to do something. I watched him slip. I waited until the projector hid the sound. Brunner read aloud the final passage. The ice was strong enough by midnight. The lake accepted him. The silence was restored. I cleaned the booth. I placed the things in the box. Howard watched calmly. His hands didn't shake. He had been obsessed not with killing, but with keeping stillness. Danny, with his music and motion, had shattered the quiet world Howard had built alone. It wasn't rage that drove him. It was reverence. He didn't hate Danny. He adored him. He wanted to preserve him. Howard had lured Danny into the booth, offered warmth, a place to sit. Then, when Danny refused, when he spoke too loudly, when he tried to leave, Howard struck. Just once. The ticket was real. Given to Danny with a trembling hand. But the theater wasn't sanctuary. It was the tomb. Afterward, Howard sealed the helmet, the wallet, and the hammer inside the rusted box. He walked to the lake under cover of night, through the theater's rear door, and let it sink beneath the black ice. The skates stuck upright were never part of the plan, but became a haunting detail he couldn't control. When asked why he kept the scarf, Howard only said it was soft, and it smelled like snow. In the end, he was led away without resistance. The boy everyone suspected had enemies. But the man who watched from the quiet corner, who no one remembered at all, had been the one to silence him. The trial was brief. The evidence irrefutable. Howard Blake, quiet projectionist of Windermere, was sentenced to life without parole. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read, only a faint sigh, as though a long-standing hum had finally stopped. Marla Cray sat in the front row, fingers laced together until her knuckles whitened. Behind her, Kyle Mercer kept his eyes low, guilt-heavy, though he bore no crime. Jake Lawson never attended the hearings. He left Windermere the day the news broke and never returned. Howard's confession was clinical. He admitted to everything, the lure, the blow, the placement of the body beneath the lake. But it wasn't malice in his voice. It was admiration, a twisted devotion. I wanted to keep him safe, he said. Still, quiet, untouched. Danny Cray had been a boy in motion skating circles around a frozen world, and Howard, forgotten, invisible, had mistaken stillness for love. For Marla, the revelation didn't bring peace, only clarity. She often replayed that final night in her mind, the way Danny's door had clicked shut, the way the wind had whispered through the house as if trying to speak, the way silence had settled over their home like a blanket too heavy to lift. She visited the lake on the first winter after the trial. The surface had frozen again, perfect, unbroken. She stood at the edge, scarf wrapped tight, watching the wind dance across it. Beneath her boots, the ice cracked faintly, settling, shifting, remembering. She placed Danny's journal on the bench. Open to the last page. They don't want me to be quiet. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the lake in bruised gold. She turned to leave, then paused. There, by the theater's rear exit, a new lock had been installed. New paint, new lights. And yet, the shadow of a boy skating past it still lingered in the corner of her mind. As they walked back to the car, Detective Brunner looked at her. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. Then I'm still listening for him. As they closed the door, Marla looked at the lake one last time. The real journey was just beginning. In the end, that was the lesson. Evil might hide behind familiar faces, but truth endures. As they moved toward their new future, Marla squeezed Brunner's hand. What if it's never quiet again? Then we speak his name louder. They stepped toward healing, toward a future they would build one day at a time.
Thank you for listening to Brody's Stories. Until we meet again.